It's really hard to be yourself. It's really hard to chart a course that is unique to you and might not look like anybody else's path, especially when there's so much noise out there about what a good life looks like, quote unquote, good life looks like. For me, the voices have been about prestige and power and titles and wealth. And I've just kind of recognized like, that's not it for me. I certainly don't not want to have any money, right? Like I do want to be okay. But I really like what I'm driving to is hopefully a full life that's rooted in loving relationships with others and deep relationships with people, service. Like I was helpful, right? And then also like I had a really high quality of being. I was attentive to myself and kind of grounded in this sense of like, I am enough.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Unmuted Moments, our podcast for young professionals exploring their journey to finding and owning your voice. I'm your host, Ahis, and today I'm excited to be joined by Josh Williams, a leader passionate about education, social impact, and equity. He's currently the Director of Strategy at Chicago Beyond, which is a philanthropic organization dedicated to ensuring that every individual, regardless of zip code, has equitable access to opportunities. In our conversation, we'll dive into how he found his voice, allyship, and inclusive leadership, what led him to public service, and his advice for anyone to stay true to their ideals. So, Josh, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for your time. I like to start from the very beginning. How did your environment and experiences growing up shape your voice and your confidence in your voice?
It's a great question. I think one of the first facts, kind of like fun facts that I share about myself when I'm with new groups and new people is both of my parents were Methodist ministers. So I'm a PK squared. My mom and dad were representing churches in different parts of the Chicagoland area. And so when I was growing up, I was often seeing my mom and dad on stage preaching about these big T truths, love, justice, the importance of service and humility. I was a kid, and so I was like hanging in the back with my two siblings goofing around, but I think I still kind of appreciated and internalized some of these messages. And I think I also saw role models in my parents and the sense of like, I never became a pastor, but I had this sense of, I could do that. I could preach, I could publicly speak. And so when given the opportunities to speak, I do try to do that. And then I think also, I had these parents, and then I also had my brother who passed away in 2021, but was 9 years older than me, and my sister is 6 years older than me. And they were really my champions too, right? So I got a lot of love and support from my parents and my siblings. Like we didn't have sibling rivalry because I was so much younger. It's like hard to have a rivalry with someone who's a decade younger than you. But they were really supportive. And so I feel like I got a lot of support from my family to have my voice and to root that voice in love. And then I think also just, knowing a little bit about the work that I do now and equity, like I see the privilege that I've had, and through that lens of privilege, like as a white man in America, in school, in sports, often people were, not questioning, like there was no unconscious bias, directed at me. And so I was often encouraged, like, raise your hand, speak up. It was just like the thing. And so that was really my life for the first 24 years, living in that lens of privilege.
Sorry to hear about your brother. I guess so. Growing up, though, growing up in an environment where your parents were pastors or ministers, did you have opportunities to practice or to get on stage or do some of that type of stuff?
I think my jam when I was in high school, I guess it was in 8th grade, I was in a band. I was the lead singer of a band in the north suburbs of Chicago. And I moved and I was like, I gotta start another band. And so I spent the bulk of my high school career trying to cobble together a friend group where people could play the instruments. By junior year, 3 Days Till Tomorrow was our very cool band name, came together.
Oh, that's 3 days till tomorrow. That's very cool.
Let that one sink in. And so, I think there was this like performative aspect of that. I mean, again, you're not preaching, but like I likes to be on stage. I likes to be, sharing ideally like music or messages that are like joyful in nature. I never, gave any like prominent speeches or things like that. My My like voice in those early years was really just like in the classroom, like trying to speak up in the classes. And I was really into the arts and humanities, like literature and all that. And then like as I grew, there have been some opportunities, to give a speech here and there, like a Teach for America thing or whatnot. But really, I think just in those formative years, it was like that daily participation in my immediate school environment. And then again, these things I gravitate towards like music, playing guitar on stage. I learned to break dance, which is another thing that like becoming a center of attention. Like I did kind of crave, some of that attention toward myself when I was young.
So I guess, yeah, this sort of brings up another point that voice is just one way of self-expression, right? Like the
Mm.
breakdancing and the rock band, those
Yeah.
are other avenues to express yourself, to show your confidence. Was there any in the early days? Was there any sort of moments where you felt like you had some type of self-doubts or any sort of challenging environment as it relates to voice or self-expression, where you felt like you had to lean on something to overcome it, whether your parents or anything else like that?
Yeah, my self-doubt. I mean, again, those early years when I was writing songs and like playing them for people, you're always kind of afraid like how that's gonna work out, what people are gonna think. But, I was just kind of doing it. It really was later in life, and maybe we can pivot and talk a little bit about this when I was a teacher and I was working in the South Bronx where I had this sense of uncertainty about what I should say or what I ought to say. Maybe I can tell you a little bit about that moment for me.
So I guess to set the stage for listeners,
Yeah.
so I guess why in the first place, why did you decide to take this direction to do teaching and also to go to the South Bronx? What was that moment for you to make the decision?
Yeah, this was really like probably the inflection point in my life to date. Right. So I was coming out of school in 2009, recession's happening. My first job was in insurance consulting, which for me was just like a great, first career opportunity, but was not something that I found great passion in after doing it for, a year and a half or so. I was living in Denver. I was working in insurance consulting. And I remember the night, and it was January 19th, 2011. And I was just kind of like sitting up in bed, or one of those nights where you're just kind of laying in bed. And I just felt really lonely. And I felt really kind of lost in my career. Like I wasn't able to establish a lot of meaningful relationships in Denver. Like I had some, but it just felt like that wasn't quite there. In insurance consulting, I was on the right path on paper to continue to succeed. This isn't the thing for me. I was getting a lot more joy out of some of the volunteer activity I was doing. Like I was involved in Big Brothers Big Sisters, and through my work we were supporting a local women's shelter. Again, some of that stuff that maybe relates to my parents' line of work. And I just had this sense of feeling lost. But then I had this moment of like what I can only describe as an epiphany or clarity. And it was just this vision of myself teaching, right? Like I had this vision of me as a teacher. And the way I imagine it, I don't know if any of your listeners have watched the show Boy Meets World, but there was like this cool teacher, Mr. Hunter, who wore leather jackets and taught English and like was kind of profound, a little edgy. And I was like, man, I could like be like that. I could like be a teacher, teaching kids. And I just like imagined it. And it was so compelling. And then, of course, the fear sets in of how am I actually going to do this? Do I have to go to graduate school? How much money am I going to make? The doubt and fears kind of start to come in. But at the same time, I was like, no, I just feel so compelled by this. I got to see what's out there. And so I looked it up, and the deadline to apply to Teach for America, the final deadline, was 1 week away. I had applied to Teach for America coming out of college, and I didn't get in. So this was my second at bat. And I was like, heads down, go for it. I think it was just a compelling vision of doing something that was more aligned to my authentic truth and who I wanted to be. Fast forward, I did get into the program. I'd never been to New York City, but they're like, you want to be a K-12 special education teacher, which is a very broad category of things that you might do.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, send me, let's go. I went out to New York, and I was a teacher and administrator at a school called Lion Charter School in the Hunts Point neighborhood of the Bronx for 6 years. And so that was kind of the impetus, just this feeling of clarity and then also great risk. But I was 24. I didn't have any real responsibilities. So I decided to go for it and make this big pivot. And I'm so glad I did because I learned so much. And then I also met my then girlfriend, now wife, who was a teacher. And so like really good stuff.
So I want to explore this sort of moment of clarity because a lot of people often find themselves at those crossroads where maybe what they're doing currently doesn't seem to align with their future goals or their, some of their ideals. And it's often sort of hard to actually find that clarity and decide to actually like do it. And sometimes, people lean on like a mentor or somebody to say, hey, like lean on someone or lean on parents and lean on something, or I guess religion. So for you, it sounds like those volunteer events or sort of community service type things that you did. So those sort of helped you in gaining that clarity. Is that a correct assessment?
I think so. I think it was just this feeling of like being a little lost, right? And that like that fog. But then this sense of like, well, what drives me? Like me, different than you or anyone else.
Yeah.
And then just kind of this crystallized idea. And so, yeah, I absolutely think the joy that I was getting out of the work that I was doing as a volunteer was a part of it. But I also look at my whole life, and the things that have often brought me joy are related to some degree of service and some degree of community building. And then also just enjoying being with people. So I think, for people who are in that moment of uncertainty, it's like going inward and having some sense of what is calling you individually, right? Because it may differ. And the hardest part is when that doesn't align to what society says we ought to do, which is like get the prestige points, get the power, get the money, get the wealth, all this stuff. And, there's some pragmatic realities to what we all need to be all right. But, there's diminishing returns to all that. And so, you can get on this fast track to career success.
Yeah.
Ultimately be unfulfilled at the end of it.
So this is fascinating to me because I think about sort of career trajectory. It's this framework of like life is in seasons. Like there's a season to pursue financial success, for example, a season for family stuff, a season for legacy, like you own your own business, do your own thing, lead a group, lead a team. And I guess you found that early. Like for me, for me coming here as an immigrant, my number one priority was, first of all, to stay in the country, to be able to stay in the country. And what that meant was I had to get a good job.
Yeah.
And then once I got a good job, then it was like, okay, I have a family back home with support who depends on me. So I have to make sure I have a good paying job.
Yeah.
So I can help myself, help them. Then got to the point where, I got married and became family. Then I feel very comfortable with that, from the family side, financial side, I feel very comfortable. So now I'm exploring things like this. So I just find it fascinating when I meet people who sort of got into that clarity like very, very early on. And even like spend time exploring and doing different things to before they get there. And obviously, as we said, like that's unique to you. Everyone has different sort of realities they have to go through, right? Whether it's your family situation, your relationship situation, there's a lot of stuff that comes into the equation. But so staying with this experience teaching, how did that experience sort of impact your voice and sort of shape your understanding of sort of social impact and wanting to help, help achieve a more just, a more equitable world?
The one thing I just circle back to is like, I didn't totally figure it all out when I was 25. Like I am still figuring it out. And I appreciate this idea of seasons because like our priorities can change and however you define season, usually I think of 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
But on this question of like, how did that change me when I was a teacher? So like, all of a sudden, again, I was working as a middle school special education teacher in the South Bronx with much more diverse set of colleagues, right, across racial lines, sexuality, like all of these, identity lines of difference. And then also the student body was predominantly Black and Latino, kids and families, right? And so I was able to just like build relationships, understand different perspectives through like actual human interactions day to day. I was starting to really marinate in a deeper understanding of American history and reading books like The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander and Pedagogy of the Oppressed and Just Mercy. And like, having a deeper understanding with this lens of history of like why the systems of power are the way that they are and the impacts of poverty, but also like the beauty, the strength, the resilience within those communities. And so I think, again, when I was just getting started as a teacher, we had these like diversity dialogues amongst Teach for America people. And this was that moment where I really sensed that like my whole life I've been kind of conditioned to speak, but this is a period where I need to listen, right? I was in classrooms where people had lived experiences with the impacts of racism, lived experiences with sexism, and we're talking about it. And I was like, damn, like people know and like have felt and experienced this so much more deeply than I have. Like this is a moment where I just need to listen a little bit. And so I did that, for a while. I did participate, but I was a lot quieter in those classrooms than maybe I was when I was 18 in my like AP English class or whatever. You know what I mean? And then over time, something I've come to realize is like to build this new world, you know, that is equitable and prosperous, like it does truly take all of us. The white men like myself have to be engaged in this. We can't be on the sideline just listening, and people of color and across all these identity markers. When I came to Kellogg, I went to business school at the Kellogg School of Management. I did this spiritual retreat before my second year where I kind of was just trying to tease out, do I want to go into management consulting or not? And kind of one of the things I recognized on that retreat was I need to speak up more at the business school, in the classrooms that I'm in. Like, these are some powerful people. They're going to be some powerful people. I need to, you know, rally a little bit. And so I kind of came in hot my second year. I wrote a letter to the administration about how we had to make sure diversity, equity, and inclusion was a priority. I got some like 200 co-signers on that letter. You know, I really was like fired up and ready to go. I think, you know, I'm always kind of toggling. My natural inclination is to speak. And I think there's something very real about recognizing when a better bet is to listen for a minute. And so I'm trying to do that with my career and do that in my day to day. Again, for my vision for equity and for justice is this quote that's like, if you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together, right? And the world will be better for all of us, including me, when we are able to rid ourselves of the lie of white supremacy, when we are able to create a more equitable and prosperous society. Like, it gets better for me too, and my kids and everybody. I want to continue to work towards those ends.
That's very powerful. So thank you for sharing that. A lot of the listeners for this show are going to be sort of immigrants and first generation professionals who are often navigating sort of spaces where they might feel like outsiders. And in as much as the goal of this show is to promote voice and finding your voice and being confident to express yourself, I think you touch on something that's very important, the listening part. I think sometimes it's like this, it's a pendulum, I guess. But sometimes you could be on one side where, I guess if you start off from a place where you never felt comfortable to speak up, then I guess I would say maybe you should, to the extent you have any opportunities to, you should over-index in the other side, like try to speak up. But sometimes, like in your case, maybe that was never an issue for you. So there has to be a conscious decision to wanting to listen, because that's very important to listen. And also too, like even if you started from a place where maybe you weren't very comfortable initially speaking up, but a place where you can speak up now, it's still important to remind yourself. I still have to remind myself, even when I do this podcast.
Yeah.
And sometimes when I ask a question and sometimes you say something that resonates with me, my first inclination is just to jump like, yes, this has happened to me before. Or I was thinking about something that relates to this topic. And so too, but the way we can have a very good dialogue or conversation, even something as small as this podcast too, is if I listen. So I'm going to try my best to listen for the rest of the show. Because it's very important, especially as we become leaders where we have a position of power, of influence, it becomes very important. And that's also how you find those people who may need some extra push. If you don't listen and observe like those who may look up to you, there might be people who have a lot of gifts in them, but are not comfortable speaking up. And if you are just always talking,
Totally.
you may overshadow those people, and those people may not have the chance to shine your light.
And there's solutions, right? Like people who have experienced things, like have solutions that are very valuable to offer. So I think, again, as a leader, or when you're in a more powerful subset of the group, like there is this importance of listening and making sure you're really hearing people, whether it's about something simple like a project or something big, like how do we fix society? But then the other thing I think about is when you have a little bit more power as a leader or influence, like when you speak up, it often is less risky to you, right? Versus more junior is less risky to you, and it's potentially more effective to like move things, in a positive direction. Have that lens when I'm thinking about when's it time for me to listen and when's it time to speak. And it's imperfect, but I try to be intentional about that.
Awesome. Yeah. So going back to business school, you wrote a piece back, this was almost 6 years ago, why I aspire to be an ally and inclusive leader. I want to go visit that again real quick. So what inspired you to write that at the time, and how has that evolved for you from business school to today, being an ally in inclusive leadership?
Well, I think it was the same year that I came out hot. I don't remember if they asked me to write something or I wrote something and was like, put it out there. And, the piece, if I recall, was like 6 years ago or so. There's like the business case for why being a diverse, inclusive leader is valuable, right? There's a lot of research that shows diverse teams are more effective at solving problems and creating value. They're slower, right? You've got that diversity of perspective. The world potentially is becoming more integrated, more global. And so I think I was making this point that it is valuable for people to see the importance of being an inclusive leader wherever you are. But then I also get really peeved when the case gets rooted in that. And it's like, oh, it just makes business sense. It's like, no, but it's also, and business school is not always great about this, like talking about moral judgment and moral compasses and moral things. Like it is also, and for me, more important, morally, the right thing to do. Like I would never want to be excluded or dinged or harmed because of, some aspects of my identity. And so I don't want a world where that happens for anybody. And that is a moral thing. And it kind of, and even if that would made less business sense, I'd still be for it, full stop. And so I think I'm kind of making those 2 points. When I went out to consulting, I started to do work in education, and I was part of the racial equity and education group. I find my way to the people who have big hearts, do-gooders, want to help the world. And so I kind of just try to find those people in any aspect of my career. Chicago Beyond, it's all of us, right? That doesn't have to be a social impact committee because the work we do is, social impact work, is equity work. I've been grateful to find so many people like that as I've gone along in my journey, depending on the team, depending on the group, trying to leverage folks' strengths, trying my best to see people for who they are and what drives them, and not being exclusive in any type of way. I'm a real integrator at heart.
So double click on this one, what inclusive leadership means. I guess if you could just tell us more in a practical sense to you, not just from your experience, like for our leaders, whether politically, whether in business and the not-for-profit space, to you, what's that ideal? What does that look like?
I mean, in an organization that has tremendous inclusive leadership, everybody within that organization feels a sense of, I am seen, I am supported, I have what I need to succeed here, right? And you don't have these hierarchies where super diverse at the entry pipeline, everybody's really diverse who we recruit, but you look at the top of that organization, it's still mostly white guys. To be an inclusive leader, whether you're more junior or more senior, is to create that environment where people across all different lines of difference can succeed. And so, often I've seen in organizations the benefits of affinity groups, the benefits where people get, community, but then also actual practical career support and networking support, because left to our own devices, I feel often people kind of just find people like them. And so we need to be intentional to kind of disrupt that and find ways to support people and to help them with whatever the coaching or the skills that are needed to succeed. And then I think also this comes from my special education teaching experience, leveraging the strengths of people, right? There's some unique experiences where if you grew up one part of the world, like Nigeria, you have some strengths and some perspectives that will benefit any group or any room you inhabit, and seeing those as strengths versus trying to form fit the person to the culture that already exists. So if you're on a team, let's say you're an engagement manager at McKinsey or whatever, understanding who people are, understanding what their strengths are, giving them opportunities to shine into those strengths, and then also providing the coaching to strengthen areas of growth. I was strong in data analytics as an example, but I was not the whiz. But I think really, one of my strengths is people. One of my strengths is relationship building. So I just need to keep for myself building on that strength and get strong enough in data and analytics, get strong enough in some of these things, but they're not the passionate things that drive me. So I think inclusive leaders really see people and understand people, who they are, what their strengths are, leverage those strengths, and then also, create opportunities for growth, and also seeing systemic barriers that exist. I know there's so many barriers that exist that make it hard for people to go from the bottom of those pyramids to the top, and some are more difficult to name and to address than others.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I hope some leaders out there listen to this and can learn one or two things from what you just shared. So just stay in this topic. In our current environment, this whole idea of diversity and inclusion is taking us all from different directions. So as someone who's passionate about this area, how do you stay grounded? What gives you hope in all of this?
That's a good question. It is a wild time right now. I feel like it's a wild time. There's lots of disruptions happening in technology, climate change, late stage capitalism, populism, right? And these old demons are rearing their head, right? They're back, and it's, what do we do? And I feel this stress, for me, but I also see the real harm that is happening to people. And that can feel a little bit overwhelming. What helps me to feel encouraged, one thought is like widening my gaze, right? Like seeing the bigger picture of history. And Barack Obama often talks about these pendulum swings,
Yep.
right? But that doesn't make the terrible times or the hard times less terrible.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
hard right
Yeah.
now, but it
Yeah.
does help to see that like over time, all storms run out of water. I'll swing back. But then also like, MLK and this long arc of history, like it's shaped when a large group of people, lots and lots of people have the courage to kind of speak up and do something. And so often, we need to think about that. Like what can we do? So I have hope. There's this concept of like the Stockdale paradox. It's like looking unflinchingly at the facts, at the turmoil, at the hard stuff, at the darkness, or however you want to name it, and seeing it for what it is. And also having this unwavering conviction that there is hope, this unwavering commitment to like, I'm going to be a part of the solution. I'm going to be a part of like the group that is trying to make this world better, more equitable, more prosperous, less exclusive, less divisive, less tumultuous. And so, I see that large swing of history. I see that sense of like, it will get better with enough of us kind of doing something. And well, so what is that something? And for me, it's, I'm fortunate in that I work in an organization that's doing good day-to-day work to create equity. But I also like in this season of life, I'm really focused on being a really present and supportive dad. I have a 2.5-year-old daughter. We're about to have a kid, a son at the end of June.
Congrats.
As parents out there know, it is real labor. Got kids off at daycare, pick them up, make snacks, make dinner, clean all this stuff, do bedtime. But it's so, so important. And so I'm trying to like focus a leadership lens on my family, focus a leadership lens on how do I raise like powerful, joyful, grounded, moral humans who then will go have, countless interactions out in the world and do things that are beautiful in the world. So I'm trying to like stay grounded in hope, have that unwavering conviction that like we can make this better, doing stuff day to day that might seem simple, but is actually, pretty real. And then of course, like, I'm writing op-eds that, don't get published, but like I'm trying to like
One day.
That's kind of what I'm up to and how I stay grounded on this.
That's powerful. I've kind of thought about it the same way too, because on one hand, it just seems very overwhelming. Like, it's just a lot going on. And I take solace in the fact, as you mentioned, like the pendulum would swing. Like, don't lose all hope. Like, it's not the end. It wouldn't stay, well, at least we hope. It's not going to stay like this for too long.
Yeah.
And also, I guess in terms of like what to do, my sort of approach is also just being to focus as well on my immediate community, people around me. If there's anything that could help out, someone is having a problem, they're trying to assess, they're looking for a resource, whether it's an immigration resource or some resource to overcome some type of challenge that they might be going through. So that's how I'm thinking about it, how I'm focusing my energy, staying around just my family and people around me as an extent I can make an impact there to do so.
Yeah.
Because again, if you just look out at the larger society, a lot going on and it could get overwhelming quickly.
And I think in addition to the family, in addition to like your more local communities, we each do have professional roles and agency, and like, how do we choose to spend that time? And again, I'm fortunate to be at Chicago Beyond. That's a national philanthropy. We're supporting the solutions of people who are really close to the issues. Like, how do I have our organization and get messages out about that? How do I continue to support our work in justice, in Black maternal health, and in philanthropy itself? And so again, whether you're working in private equity, or you're working in consulting, or you're just getting started in teaching, each of us does have, I think, a locus of influence. Sometimes when it's overwhelming, I'm like, oh, what can I do? There's some stuff that we can do. You're a teacher, there's some stuff that you can embed in your lesson plans. When you're a consultant, there's some things that you can say to your clients or to your team. There's some action that we can actually take. And so I think, rather than getting overwhelmed with despair, it's like, what can I do? And also giving ourselves grace, right? And protecting our own wellness. I mean, I think there's also a fail factor where it's like, I got to do everything all at once. And you burn out. And so really being kind to yourself, love yourself, invest in your wellness, which is, again, kind of countercultural, right? We are not a culture that really promotes rest and restoration as much as we could or we should.
Reminds me of a saying that says, if your cup is empty, then you can't pour into others. So it just highlights the importance of sort of self-care and taking care of yourself. A few more questions. I want to go on the topic of self-doubt and imposter syndrome. So is imposter syndrome something you've ever dealt with? And if so, how do you normally navigate it?
I think all of us have experienced this, or many of the people I know,
Yep.
even from my sample set, have experienced this. And I too experience this often. It's especially pronounced when I feel like I like sneak into these prestigious groups and I'm like, I fooled you, you know, like, how you let me in. Teams for America took me 2 tries, but like my second try I was there. I was like, I don't know. It's really competitive to be here in business school and especially in management consulting. I just felt like I was this small fish in a very humongous pond, right? And I just felt like not good enough, you know, like then I think there's that fear of like, I'm not good enough. I've not achieved enough to be here. Even being on this podcast, right? You invited me a few weeks ago. I was like, dude, I don't know. I'm glad I went to the business school and all that stuff, but like, I'm not an accomplished author or written for professional magazines or whatever. So I have a little imposter syndrome just being here right now. But at the same time, you have said this even in earlier episodes of your podcast of like, you just kind of still need to go forward, right? You need to find the strength to just go try, right? Like, and I think there's been 2 real moments where I felt like tremendous self-doubt and like I'm gonna get kicked out, which was probably like imagined in my head. But I remember my first like week or 2 teaching, I was like, I'm not so good at this. I had this like night where I stayed up really late, like writing lesson plans, and it was still like Teach for America Summer Institute. And so it was like really early in the morning. I went to get like Red Bull from the local 7-Eleven, got some lesson, you know, that late in the morning. And I just had this sense of like, you know what? I'm not going to quit. Like I might get kicked out. I probably won't, but like maybe the real fear inventory is I will. But I was like, I'm not going to give up. And so, you know, once I'd made that commitment, I made it a little bit easier. I was on this really hard study or project when I was a management consultant where I just felt like the associate partner did not think I was doing a good job. I was floundering a little bit. And I remember being in this hotel room and struggling with an Excel model or something. I just had this mantra that came to me, which was I can control my attitude, I can control my effort, I will keep going, I am enough. So yeah, if the world tells me I'm not, or I get kicked out of the thing, often it's fine. And I get better at consulting, or I get better at teaching. And so, you know, when you find yourself in those places of imposter syndrome, like one, recognize like a lot of other people are feeling it. Nobody really knows what they're doing. We are all just figuring it out all the time, like at every level of leadership, right? And experiences help and pattern recognition helps. But like we can control our attitude, our effort, keep going, you're enough.
That's very powerful. I feel like we could just end this conversation here right now.
Whoa.
You are enough. That's very powerful. And yeah, so I think to the point about this podcast and inviting you, I think part of this too is everyone has a journey, no matter where you are, whether you wrote a book, whether you are a podcaster, whether you're an investment banker, whatever it is that you are, right? Everyone has a journey. It's often very unique. We've all gone through different experiences, different life experiences. So my goal with this podcast is to highlight some of those experiences. So you have a fascinating story that I hope some listeners out there can learn from. Even for me too, I guess to your point about still pushing through, one of the frameworks I use is like, let them tell me no. Because sometimes when you're doing something, you don't feel like you're enough. You're like, okay, even for this podcast, there's certain guests that I've kind of thought, oh, I think this person would be great to talk to. But I'm like, I'm just a little thin over here. Like, who is going to say yes to me? But I'm like, you know what? Let me reach out. Let them tell me no. You know what I mean? I'm not going to tell myself no. It's happened a few times where I reached out to someone I honestly didn't think they were going to say yes. I just like, but you know what? Give them a shot. And I doing it like, yes. Whoa, you know what I mean? So I think sometimes in life too, it's helpful to let you're enough and give it the best shot, and then let the world, let the other side tell you no, and not you telling yourself no.
I had a business school professor say once when it came to applying to jobs, right? Often men were like, I checked 20% of the boxes, let me apply to this thing, right? And women or people from other groups will be like, I got to make sure I'm making 100% of this, 120% of the boxes before I apply. And the business school professor's comment was like, it is not your job when you're applying for a thing to determine whether you are qualified. It is your job to express interest. It is their job to tell you whether you're qualified. And so I think that relates a little bit to what you're saying. Just take the swing and, you know, be okay with the rejection, because like that also might happen. I've been dinged by a lot of different applications that I've applied to. But you got to reach.
Yeah. I guess that's the other side of the coin, right? Yes, you take the swings and you try, but you should expect, you might get those no's, and it's fine. Like, it's not the end of the world. And this conversation really reminds me of this podcast that Jay Shetty does. His podcast is called On Purpose. And he talked about how, as humans, we overestimate the threat level of things, like applying to that job or like giving a presentation, giving a speech. We just think like it's a 10 out of 10 from a threat level. It's like red. Every time you're doing something big, you feel like, oh my God. But the truth of the matter is, like, most things that we do, because if you think about it, we're not like astronauts. Most of us are not going to space.
Yeah.
Most of us are not doing like brain surgery. Most of us are not doing, those type of things. Like, if you think about it, it's really maybe like the things we do 3 or 4 or 5. But in the moment, often you think it's a 10 out of 10. Like, an example would be like maybe talking to a manager about a promotion. In that moment, you're like, oh my God, like, this is like the biggest thing. But if you think about it, like, you're just having a conversation. You're not going to space. You're not trying to cure cancer. You're not trying to do brain surgery. You know what I mean? It's just a conversation. So I try to use that frame of mind too. That frame of like the threat level. If something is bothering me too much, I'm like, okay, let's calm down here.
Yeah.
Like, what is the real threat here? We tend to overinflate the threat level of different activities that we do, especially the things that we're doing for the first time.
Yeah.
And as I said in that episode, my first episode about just the showing up, if you just do your pre-assessment and give yourself some kind of threat level, 8 or 7, whatever, and it's driving you crazy, that may not be true because you never actually did it. But it's in showing up and doing the thing that you realize, you know what, it wasn't that bad. Most often than not. So this is, just from my perspective, this is sort of some framework I use to like recenter myself when I feel like I'm getting on the ledge or something is just like driving me nuts, that if you think about it, if you really like calm down and think about it, like it shouldn't. Still on the same topic of self-doubt, imposter syndrome. What's your message? If there's college senior or new graduate, somebody trying to embark on something, maybe like in your situation, you were in your first job thinking about switching to maybe a new career path, but they have all this self-doubt about making that decision. What's your advice, or what are some framework? How do you think through sort of making such a pivotal decision? Is there someone in that spot who may be listening today?
I think one thing that's been helpful, you used this word seasons earlier, right? And so there's a reflective exercise of just naming, like, what is your season of life? What are you solving for right now? It was different for me when I was 22. Like, I just didn't want to live in my parents' basement during the Great Recession. And I had this job opportunity. It was a good one. So my framework for what I was solving for was different than later on when I was working in consulting and realized I needed more time and I needed to be a present dad. And so I needed to maybe downshift on the hours a little bit. And so, those choices are all kind of made with this intentionality, but you can't really have that intentionality until you kind of know what your season is about. What are your priorities right now? Don't make a laundry list. Again, my perspective, like, I try to keep it to like 3 to 5 things. What are the themes of like what I want to be true about my life right now? And then, you can use that whether quantitatively or qualitatively to assess like the things that you're thinking about doing. Like, will this thing bring me closer to that? So when I was 24, again, I don't know if I formally went through this exercise, but I was realizing like I need like day-to-day meaning and like social impact in my like 40 hours or so a week. And like that is a must have. The teaching thing kind of came to be from that. I think, where you're thinking about 2 different career choices or, just know what your season is, kind of create your rubric and then evaluate. Sometimes I nerd out and I make an Excel sheet and I like put scores. So you don't have to do all that.
Different weights in them.
Exactly. But you're saying, oh, this is a 6.7 and what was a 7.1? Even doing that exercise helps you be like, but no, I still am more interested in the 6.7. It's always that qualitative, quantitative. Also having your journey, this reflective journey to be like, what is right for you as an individual? And we say this stuff all the time to kids and it's like a little bit of platitude. Like, be yourself, right? It's really hard to be yourself. It's really hard to chart a course that is unique to you and might not look like anybody else's path, especially when there's so much noise out there about what a good life looks like, quote unquote, good life looks like. Again, for me, the voices have been about prestige and power and titles and wealth. And I've just kind of recognized like, that's not it for me. I certainly don't not want to have any money, right? Like I do want to be okay. But I really like what I'm driving to is hopefully a full life that's rooted in loving relationships with others and deep relationships with people. Service, like I was helpful, right? And then also like I had a really high quality of being. I was attentive to myself and kind of grounded in this sense of like, I am enough. And the one other point I'd make on that, especially as a dad, when you recognize it's kind of a life-altering thing and the gift that life is, like, none of us did anything to be here. We're just here. So you don't have to like earn it. You don't have to like win enough to be worthy of it. Like, it was just given to you. And so the call that I have for myself and maybe for others is, what you're asked to do is just like live into your authentic self. Much easier said than done. I'm still trying to figure it out. But that's, I think, the recommendation is like, know your season of life, know your priorities, and then also like be very, very cool with that being different than like what anybody else out there is telling you.
I love that. I love to know your season, knowing what you're maximizing. Because I think part of the challenge is you have a million things you're trying to solve for. Like, okay, is it compensation?
Yeah.
Is it the city life? Is it my friends? Is it being close to family? Do I have access to this thing or that thing? So narrowing it down to 3 to 5 things, as you said, I think that's very powerful and hopefully helps people gain that clarity.
There was just one last point.
Yeah, go ahead.
Like, it's hard to optimize everything all the time, but I think the people who are able to really do it well are the ones who have their own compass, and then kind of just seems like things do optimize, in a broader way.
Awesome. So I'm starting a new segment called Unmuted Power Playlist. So essentially asking guests, what songs do they go to when they need to be fired up for like a big presentation or a big performance or anything big? Like when they just need something to get them going. So what are 1 or 2 songs that does that for you?
I'm in a 90s, 2000s rock cover band. That's like my one hobby. I love power chords and music of the late 90s, early 2000s. This is not a profound song in any means, and I'm a little reticent to share, but like Sugar We're Going Down was like my jam when I was in high school, and now I'm, a 38-year-old man who still plays it regularly for audiences in the Chicagoland area. And I think it's just kind of like the feeling of it gets me kind of fired up. I don't think the message, again, is that deep.
The idea here is to have a diverse list of songs that people can go and just check out, and hopefully it's fun for people to go play with. Thank you, Josh. I really appreciate you being honest and sharing your journey with me and the listeners today. And to all of our listeners, thank you for spending your time with us today. Please don't forget to subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen. And as always, you can reach out to me at unmutedmoments@gmail.com with any direct feedback. That's it for today. Thanks again for listening. I am Ahis, and until next time, stay unmuted.